Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to recap all the books that I read in October. It was a decent reading month. I completed 5 books in the end, which is that's good for me. If I can average a book a week just with my current schedule, I'm pretty happy with that. So the 5th book was actually a bonus. It is female author heavy and a little bit of mix of light stuff and heavier topics. So the first book that I read in October was Funny Story by Emily Henry. I found this book in the charity shop, so it was perfect. I was happy to buy it because it's only like €2, I think. I've read a couple of Emily Henry's other books. I've read Happy Place, Beach Read, and Book Lovers. So that's most of them. The only one that I haven't read is You and Me on Vacation. I'm not someone who is really into romance novels. I don't mind if there's some element of romance in the novels, but I don't normally read romance novels anymore. Like at this stage of my life, it's just not really what I'm into. I typically will read more like thrillers or literary fiction, but I do enjoy Emily Henry's books because I think she's quite funny and her characters oftentimes are very likable and relatable. Like for me as a millennial, someone in their 30s, the things that she comments on are just very relatable to me. It's like her characters and Emily herself is like grown up at the same time that I have and everything else. So I do like her for that. So the main character in Funny Story is Daphne. And she is a librarian who has gotten together with this guy, what was his name? Peter. And Peter, is one of these picture perfect sort of guys who seems to have his life together. So after they got engaged, they moved together to some town in Michigan because that's where Peter is from. And of course, he's got, the picture perfect family and all that stuff. So Daphne has moved to this town because of Peter. There's a couple of tropes in this novel. So it's the roommates to lovers, fake dating, and then like the uptight and laid back contradiction. So like there's an uptight person and then there's someone who's like very laid back, and how do they balance each other out? But essentially the premise is, and it says this on it, so it's like, I'm not giving anything away here, but Peter ends up getting together with his like childhood best friend and breaks things off with Daphne. So then Daphne moves in with the ex-boyfriend of the girl that's gotten together with Peter. And it turns out, of course, there's a situation where suddenly, they're both invited to the wedding, and then she tells Peter that like she wants to bring Miles because they're dating, etc., etc., etc. Anyways, it was a fun read. I think I did enjoy it because the characters, again, were very likable. I liked Daphne and I liked Miles, who is the roommate that she, is living with. I also enjoyed that it was set in Michigan because for me, it's quite relatable. I'm not from America, but I'm from Canada and I'm from Ontario, and Michigan is like, a neighboring sort of place. Like there's Great Lakes and all that stuff. So the way that the climate is in the summer, which is when this is set, is very similar to what I grew up with. And there's also a big theme around food, which I really enjoy with my background in hospitality and then just with my interests in general. I love whenever food is discussed in books and they talk about wine and all that kind of stuff. The characters are funny and they're likable and like they're dealing with a lot of personal growth along the way. It's definitely a light read. That's the thing with Emily Henry books. Like it's certainly not literary fiction, but can be a nice book to get into if you're looking for something that's going to get you back into reading, because it's relatively easy read. It's quick, it's sweet, and it's just very palatable. So yeah, I would recommend this one. Okay, so after that light book, I had to read something with a little more substance. So I picked up Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, which I was very much looking forward to. I'm definitely a Sally Rooney fan. I know it's like she's a little bit, I don't even know if the word controversial is right, but not everyone likes her. And that can be the mark of a good artist. Again, I've always said it can be kind of good to be polarizing. You don't want to be, if you're someone that is for absolutely everyone, it's often not that interesting. You know what I mean? So Sally Rooney, this is her 4th book, I think. Yeah, she started with Conversations with Friends, Normal People, Beautiful World, Where Are You? Yeah, so this is her 4th book. I read her first book, Conversations with Friends, when it came out years ago, and I was living in Dublin at the time. And so it was one of those things, there's signed copies in the bookstore. She was like a new author, and she was very like well received and critically acclaimed right away. But of course, it took a while for the hype to actually build. But it's funny because when I bought the book and I was reading it, I was working at a restaurant at the time, and Sally Rooney actually came in for lunch at the restaurant. She had a meeting with her publisher or something like that. I don't know if it was her publisher or agent or what. That's my little connection to Sally Rooney. I got to serve her lunch back in the day when she had just written Conversations with Friends. So the book is about two brothers, Peter and Ivan, and they are very different people. So Peter's the older brother. I think he's meant to be like 32, let's say, and Ivan is 21, 22. And of course, they're very different socially as well. So Ivan is actually a like very serious chess player, which is why there's all this, chess theme. And then Peter is a lawyer in Dublin and is one of these people that puts a lot of merit on having money and wearing the right clothes and being around the right people and living in the right place and all that kind of stuff, right? So the main theme of the book is grief, and the brothers are grieving because their dad has passed away. And it's interesting. I found it so interesting because it's not like they're being very obvious about grieving. So I feel like if this was a book written from a woman's perspective, it would be much more talked about that they are grieving. But the way that she acknowledges their grief is more so through their actions and then just what it's like being inside of their head. So it's really interesting because we get to be inside the head of Ivan and Peter, and then there's also one female character that we get to see the world from her perspective as well. The way that Sally writes is so different for each person, specifically between the two brothers. One of the brothers, you can see the way that he's dealing with things, like his mind is so jumbled, and every single chapter that's from his perspective, that's how it works. It's just like running thoughts, so even if he's, let's say, in the courtroom or meeting a friend, he has these running thoughts on other things that are, whether they're going on right then or just like invasive thoughts, I suppose they would be. And then the Ivan is interesting because the way that he reads situations, social cues and stuff, can often be like kind of wrong, misinterpreted. But then it's also fascinating because we think that like he's putting out this kind of version of himself, but then whenever we see him from this other woman's perspective, we see how the world sees him or how she sees him, and that's quite different from how it is inside his brain. I always love whenever books are telling the story from different people's perspectives, because it just goes to show that like there's no right way to tell a story because everyone sees the world differently. Anyways, the book itself can feel a little bit long, especially whenever you're reading that one brother, like the chapters, whenever it is just running thoughts, you might start to get a little bit muddled and confused, but it's really beautiful writing. Like Sally Rooney knows how to write, that is for sure. And I liked that she was so, like, I really liked how she's portraying how people respond to grief differently or how they grieve differently. Because whenever you're reading the book and you're reading what's going on in these guys' lives and their day-to-day lives, you forget that they're grieving because they never say that they're grieving. And then every once in a while, another character that they're interacting with will say something like, oh yeah, but of course, because you're grieving. And you're like, oh yeah, these guys are grieving. Like, that's why they're acting so crazy, So yeah, there's some heavy topics in here. There's, some dark thoughts. So if you struggle with anything like that, maybe just like look into trigger warnings first. I feel like I'm rambling, but anyways, Sally Rooney, excellent author. She really knows how to write. With this book, you might just want to take your time to get into it. It's not, for me anyways, it wasn't like nearly as quick of a read as something like Funny Story by Emily Henry, but there's a lot more depth to it for sure. Like this is much more of a serious book, and I enjoyed the journey. Because I live in Dublin, I love to read stories about other people living in Dublin too. I always enjoy that. Let me know in the comments if you want me to make a video where I bring you to all of the main places that the characters go in Dublin from this book. Anyways, moving on. After reading Intermezzo, I wanted something a little bit lighter. The next book that I was going to read actually had to do with grief as well. And I was like, not a chance. I need to read something that's just easy right now. So when I want something like that, I will normally go for Lisa Jewell. So this book I found in the charity shop as well. I'm always looking out for books by Lisa Jewell. Lisa writes thrillers, and she's a good writer too. I do really enjoy her writing. This book was good, but what I find with Lisa Jewell books sometimes, and again, this is what I wanted, so there's no blame here, but I find I'll read them so quickly, and her themes are often so similar to her other books that they all just sort of blend together. Like, I'll have a hard time remembering which book was which, like what actually happened in this specific book and what the names of the characters were, because it feels very similar to another book that she's written. Again, that's okay because it's something that I enjoy and something that I'm signing up for. When I read thrillers, I feel like it's more of a TV experience. It feels like I'm sitting down to binge watch some TV shows. Whereas if I read literary fiction, that's more of a journey. I don't know. Anyways, so this book, Watching You, is set in Bristol in England. And it's set in like this small little neighborhood in Bristol, though, where it's very picturesque, these pretty beautiful houses, and everyone kind of knows what everyone's up to. So the issue here is that someone has been murdered in their house, and so we're trying to figure out like who in the neighborhood would have done it and who would have wanted to kill them, sort of thing. But her style is nice. It's light. Oftentimes her characters again can have a good sense of humor, which is nice. It does deal with heavy topics. Obviously, like the main premise of this book is figuring out who is murdered. So this is some heavy stuff. But yeah, it was fun. It was light. It was easy. I would recommend it, but I don't think it was one of her bests. It's okay, but it's I prefer some of her other books more. And then this book was probably my favorite book of the month, and it was very unassuming. I would have never even picked this book up if I hadn't come across it in the charity shop, which is why I love to buy my books in the charity shop. I even love it more than the library because I can just browse and see what people have dropped in there. So sometimes it's authors that I know and things that I'm looking for, like if there's a Lisa Jewell book or Emily Henry or Sally Rooney or anything like that. But then other times I'll just come across something random and I'll kind of like the look of it, and I would have never thought to have gotten it if it hadn't been dropped in there. This book, Service by Sarah Gilmartin, she is an Irish author, and so it sets place in Dublin, which again, as I said, I love. And this is specifically about the hospitality industry in Dublin. And it has to do as well, it's set in like the Me Too movement. So it's dealing with that kind of concept. I'll just read the back of the book to give you the gist. When Hannah learns that famed chef Daniel Costello is facing accusations of sexual assault, she's thrown back to the summer she spent waitressing at his high-end Dublin restaurant. The plush splendor of the dining rooms, the wild parties after service, and the sizzling tension of the kitchens. But Hannah also remembers how the attention from Daniel soon morphed from kindness into something darker. Now the restaurant is shuttered, and Daniel is faced with the reality of a courtroom. His wife, Julie, is hiding from paparazzi lenses from the bedroom curtains. Surrounded by the wreckage of the past, Daniel, Julie, and Hannah must reconsider what happened at the restaurant. Their three different voices reveal a story of power and complicity, the lies we tell, and the courage it takes to face the truth. Oh man, I love that. Oh, I love this again because it's told from three different perspectives. So it's told from the perspective of this head chef who's being sued, and the waitress Hannah, and the wife of the chef. So it's powerful because we get to really see how people are viewing each situation. So we are dealing with heavy topics again, dealing with sexual assault, and it's really crazy to see from the perspective of like the man involved, how he sees things one way, and then the woman sees things another way, and then that woman sees things like a different way altogether. And it's just like the lines are so blurry and it's so hard to figure out what actually happened. I found this fascinating because I have worked in high-end restaurants before. I've never worked in a Michelin star restaurant, but I have worked in Michelin standard restaurants. Thankfully, I've never worked in a place that's like this crazy, but I do know about it. I know that it exists. And I mean, I have worked in places too, and I just haven't been like involved in the community enough really to get involved. But what she's talking about with like the staff drinks and the late nights, she's a student at the time. So, she's doing this as like a summer job and just kind of like making tons of money and having the time of her life. And then there's the glamour too of the high-end clientele, but then also the feeling in the restaurant where, especially the chefs, like they feel like gods. I don't know. There's something crazy about food and drink that makes people pretentious can be the right word, but it's not the word that I'm looking for. Maybe it's because food and drink bring so much pleasure to people. You feel so powerful that you're the one bringing that pleasure to people. Maybe that's what it is. I'm not sure. But anyways, if you're interested in hospitality at all, like whether you've worked in hospitality or if you just like going to nice restaurants, you will probably find this book really interesting. There's some tough stuff that's dealt with, but it's all very real. So I think stuff like that can be really important to like think about and face head on sometimes. So yeah, anyways, this book, had never heard of it, randomly found it, and I really loved it. I absolutely like flew through this book. So I would highly recommend. If you like that novel Sweet Bitter, you'll like this. And to be honest, I think this is better. I think this is much better than Sweet Bitter. So yeah, highly recommend. The other book that I consumed was an audiobook. So, I mean, I didn't read it, but I listened to it. And for audiobooks, I will normally listen to nonfiction. I prefer to read fiction and like really get into the book and see the characters from my perspective and hear from them from my perspective, etc., etc. But I do enjoy listening to nonfiction books. So the one that I read was called The Now Habit by Neil Fiore, who has a PhD. The Now Habit, a strategic program for overcoming procrastination and enjoying guilt-free play. Techniques to help any busy person get more things done more quickly without the anxiety and stress brought on by delay and pressing deadlines. If you are a professional, manager, student, entrepreneur, writer, or homemaker, this audiobook will help you achieve your goals more rapidly, whether they be large, complex challenges or the small, essential tasks of everyday life and work. What I enjoyed about this book most was that he was talking about scheduling play. And I love that because life is about so much more than work. And he's kind of saying that when we procrastinate work, it's consuming everything, you know? So it's like the idea that if we condense work down to a certain amount of time, you actually will accomplish things in that time. And then you need to actually schedule play in as well. So that could be going to the gym, reading, or just doing anything that's for you, right? So he's saying that it's very important for you to actually schedule that time in and to be realistic about how much time you're actually going to spend working on something in a very focused way. I think I saved some quotes from this book. I did enjoy it. It was a good audiobook to listen to. I liked the guy. I didn't find him annoying, and I didn't find him too intense. Sometimes with nonfiction books, it's like a little too preachy, and I just can't get into it. Some of the things I took away from it was like he was saying, change your mentality from I have to do this to I get to do this, which I think is nice. He talks about the power of choice. So again, you're choosing to do things rather than you have to do things. Scheduling recreational time and play. Schedule your work. He says do it for 30-minute intervals, and then you need to schedule your non-work time so that you actually value it. Because he was saying if we don't schedule our non-work time, we don't value it as much. We tend to value things more when we actually schedule it. Otherwise, it feels like we're just kind of like floating in space and not accomplishing things, if that makes sense. And the other thing that I mentioned earlier is that work expands to fill available time. So for me, I found this book helpful and motivational to just remind myself to schedule my leisure time and to really enjoy that time. And that that's like a big part of my life, that my life isn't just centered around work. And then also if I'm dreading doing something for work, shifting that mentality and thinking like, I get to do this, so I can do this. Anyways, that might feel a little bit rambly, but I have, if you have Spotify, like the premium version of Spotify, you can listen to audiobooks for free. So that's what I do. I don't actually, it feels very risk-free for me then with listening to audiobooks. I can try it out, and if I don't really like it, I can leave it. But yeah, if you have the premium version of Spotify, you can check out The Now Habit and see what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books and what you thought about them. And also, I'm always open to more book recommendations. So if you like any of these authors or spotted any of these authors and thought like, oh, this author actually, if you like this author, you might like this one, let me know in the comments as well. I'd love to try them out. As always, thank you so much for watching and hope to see you soon.